Have you ever wondered why we so easily fall for a grand illusion, even when the cold, hard facts are staring us right in the face? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're deconstructing a core law of power that reveals a kind of uncomfortable yet totally fascinating truth about human nature. We're breaking down Law 37, create compelling spectacles. Think of this as a deep psychological masterclass in persuasion and visual dominance. I mean, really think about it. We absolutely exhaust ourselves trying to craft the perfect logical argument, right? We pull up the data, we cite facts, we map out these undeniable, watertight rationales, but we completely ignore a fundamental truth. The human brain just isn't wired for spreadsheets. It's wired for spectacle. So why is it that a perfectly researched, highly rational argument often falls completely flat, while a captivating visual or some grand dramatic gesture instantly wins people over? To answer that question, we are going to journey through history. We'll be looking at 1. The power of spectacle, 2. The moon doctor's illusion, 3. The goddess of France, 4. Why words fail us, 5. The psychology of symbols, and finally 6. Modern spectacles and power. All right, let's jump right into section 1, the power of spectacle. Here is the foundational concept. Striking imagery creates an aura of power that completely overrides our grip on reality. When you dazzle people with arresting visuals and radiant symbols, you heighten your presence. The brain gets so overwhelmed by the dazzling lights, the aesthetic cohesion, and the grand gestures that it literally locks the cognitive bandwidths to question your actual methods or intentions. You're filling their vision so completely that their analytical mind just shuts down. Dazzled by appearances, your audience is placed in the state of suspended disbelief, making them incredibly receptive to whatever you want them to think. Moving on to section 2, the moon doctor's illusion. Let's look at this mass manipulation in action. We're traveling back to Berlin in the early 1780s to study a guy named Dr. Weisslater, who orchestrated an absolute masterclass in visual deception. Picture the scene. Desperate, ailing people looking for literally any sliver of hope. Now, Dr. Weisslater had absolutely zero medical training, none. Yet he managed to convince the rich and poor alike that he could cure any ailment through a carefully staged theatrical performance. He would pack crowds of these desperate people into a massive, dark, converted beer hall. The air was thick with tension. He used the architecture of the building to let silvery moonlight pour in through windows at these weird, odd angles. Finally, the sick were led upstairs, where the crowd below would suddenly hear dramatic shouts and piercing cries of miraculous healing. He essentially built an almost religious anticipation. But here's where it gets truly brilliant, and honestly, completely absurd. The doctor would just rub a patient's injury, mumble something totally incomprehensible, look knowingly at the moon, and send the patient away. But consider this psychological kicker. His wife was supposedly healing female patients in a separate, south-facing room. Wait a minute. The moon doesn't shine in a south-facing room. The moonlight couldn't possibly be seen in there. Yet, the women still left, claiming to be miraculously cured. Why? Because the mere symbolic idea of the moon, combined with the overwhelming atmosphere he created, triggered a powerful psychosomatic healing response. The moon doctor understood a deep, unchanging law of human nature. When people are suffering, or when they're desperately seeking leadership, they do not want a textbook. They don't want a lengthy, scientific, rational lecture. They want a savior. They desperately want an emotional appeal that allows them to believe in magic. A grand visual spectacle bypasses the analytical brain, which is basically our fortress of doubt and resistance, and strikes directly at the emotional core. Let's shift gears a bit. Section 3, the goddess of France. We're going from mass manipulation to a highly intimate, interpersonal branding masterclass. We're going to examine a 16th century royal romance that defied all logic. Diane de Poitiers was 20 years older than King Henri II of France. Let's frame the stakes here. She was an aging widow in a royal court that was entirely obsessed with youth. By all logic, she should have been invisible, just cast aside for younger mistresses, but she didn't just survive. She secured Henri's absolute, lifelong devotion by turning her very identity into a mythic spectacle. She exclusively wore stark black and white. She created this ubiquitous motif of their intertwined initials. Most importantly, she tied her name, Diane, to the myth of the Roman goddess Diana, the immortal goddess of the hunt. This wasn't just a cute fashion choice, you guys. It was an act of total psychological dominance. And she went to extraordinary lengths to cement this spectacle. She actually rebuilt her castle at Onnet to mirror a magnificent Doric columned Roman temple. Tapestries of the goddess adorned the walls, statues of Diana filled the gardens. You see, Henri wasn't a man of books or intellectual debate. He was a guy who loved the outdoors, deeply moved by visual splendor. And Diane didn't sit around writing him love letters begging for his affection. She literally wrapped herself in a mythic cape, transforming into a living goddess. And well, you can't really argue with a goddess. She made herself seem entirely larger than life. Which perfectly sets up Section 4, Why Words Fail Us. What exactly is the psychological mechanism at play here? Using words is actually a very dangerous game. The second you make a verbal argument, you invite me to cross-examine you. Words naturally put people on the defensive. When you argue, the other person reflects, mulls over your phrasing, and comes up with counter-arguments. They stir up division. But a visual acts like a beautiful piece of music. It just imposes itself. It completely discourages questions and communicates a complex, profound feeling instantly, short-circuiting the labyrinth of logic before the brain even realizes it's being persuaded. This concept was understood as an absolute masterstroke of historical branding by Louis XIV, the famous Sun King. He didn't write a manifesto on why he should be the absolute monarch. He didn't debate his divine right to rule. He literally just pointed to the sun, unchanging, radiant, life-giving, outshining all other stars. It requires zero translation. That single symbol instantly and undeniably communicated sheer majesty and absolute power to his subjects without him ever having to speak a single word. Let's dig even deeper in Section 5, the psychology of symbols. The truth is generally seen, rarely heard. Imagine being a captured slave in a foreign land. Your words mean absolutely nothing to your captors. This was the terrifying reality for Renaissance painter Fra Filippo Lippi when he was captured by the Moors. He didn't beg for his freedom. He didn't try to reason with them. He simply took a piece of charcoal and sketched such a brilliant, undeniable portrait of his master on a white wall. When the master saw it, the sheer visual proof of his genius won his immediate freedom. One single image shattered the master-slave dynamic instantly. But symbols aren't just for displays of dominance. They are incredibly gentle, effective tools for emotional healing. Take psychotherapist Dr. Milton Erickson, for example. If he asked a deeply traumatized patient, "Why are you so defensive?" the patient's walls would shoot right up. So instead, he would talk about a seemingly irrelevant, isolated, wind-battered ironwood tree out in the desert. The patient's subconscious would project their own trauma right onto that image. The symbol acted as a Trojan horse, allowing Dr. Erickson to bypass their logical defenses and heal the underlying emotional wound gently, but super effectively. We've seen all these brilliant historical tactics, but now we arrive at Section 6, Modern Spectacles and Power. How do we actually take these lessons and apply them today? Well, the applications are literally everywhere. Modern marketers know that printing an urgent newsletter in bright red ink bypasses logic to trigger anxiety, or that gold text instantly signifies premium wealth. General Charles de Gaulle used visual sequencing brilliantly. When entering Paris after its liberation, he made sure he physically appeared at the absolute front of the troops, ahead of all the Allied forces. That visual sequence alone convinced the world that he was the central leader of an independent France. So think about your own life. Are you meticulously arranging your visual cues, your aesthetic, your branding, your sequence of appearance? Or are you just leaving your authority totally up to chance? We really have to remember Machiavelli's timeless warning here. Human nature hasn't magically evolved past this. We are and always will be visually driven creatures swayed by the superficial. Because of this deeply ingrained psychological truth, there is absolutely no reversal to this law. You just cannot afford to ignore images and symbols. If you try to lead purely by words and logic, completely ignoring the aesthetic spectacle of your presence, you're fighting an unwinnable war against human biology. Which brings us to the final, most absolutely crucial question for you to consider today. Are you exhausting yourself arguing until you're blue in the face, trying to convince people with mere words? Or are you crafting a visual presence that commands the room before you ever utter a single syllable? It's time to stop relying on spreadsheets and logic to win hearts. Find your symbol, wear it, and watch how the world bends to your image. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you in the next explainer.